You see, our intention was to discuss the prohibition of Riba, but it turned out to be a one-way presentation, at least at the beginning, but I will try to provide you with a framework, then perhaps we can proceed to discussing some of its points. I think prohibition of Riba has not been appreciated properly yet. Although it is there is no controversy about its prohibition, but about the implications of consequences of prohibition of riba, there are many things that we need to clarify. Issue can be considered at two levels. You can either consider it at micro level or at macro level. As much as I can see, it has been considered generally at micro level, from a micro point of view. With this I mean it has been evaluated as a kind of transaction. So it carries, the analysis of this kind carries an individual step. It is viewed from the point of view of its consequences from the two contracting parties. This is one possible and legitimate way, of course. But this may prevent us from observing its consequences from a wider point of view, which are the most important aspect of the issue. With macro level, I mean it must be considered from a systemic point of view, its consequences for the economic system of Islam. Viewed from this point of view, it seems as if it is the negative expression of everything that is Islamic. You know, Islamic values are expressed either in the form of commands or in the form of prohibitions. The commands are now, but prohibitions need to be further appreciated. A system can be characterized, an economic system, for example, can be characterized by some rules of the game. if you liken economic system to play a game, it must have some rules that characterize this game or identify this game. And any game is identified or defined by the presence of this kind of rules. And rules of the game are normally negative, are in the form of prohibitions, in the form of constraints on the behavior of the players, those who participate in the game. This is normal because the rule is permissibility. الأصل في الأشياء الإباحة. So things are normally permissible. So if you are going to define a game, you must put some constraints to this general rule. This gives an identity to your game. For example, there are games that are played with a ball. Basketball, volleyball, or football. And they are played with players. In this respect, they are all the same. But if you want to distinguish between these games, you must refer to their rules. For example, in football, they say that this ball must not be played with hands and must not be played outside a determined field. The players must not resort to some kind of behavior, and this ball must be located into a specific place, which is goal, in order to determine the results of the game. In basketball, there is another main rule that this ball must not be played with foot and head, it must be played with hands, etc. So each game is defined by its rules, and these rules are normally prohibitive, carry the sign of, carry the negative sign. An economic system can be defined in the same way. So what characterizes economic systems alongside other rules that carry the positive sign? There are rules that are carrying the negative sign. These are prohibitions. And in my view, rules of the game normally are of a prohibitive type. They prohibit something. They put some constraints on the roles of the players. In an economic system, for example, regulations regarding property are a mixture of the two. Again, rules about the motivation, the behavior of actors. Again, reflect the same thing. And in an Islamic economic system, the most important example of this prohibitive rules is prohibition of Riba. And this characterizes the whole Islamic economic system. Without it, perhaps we would be in trouble to define an economic system which is Islam. We'll try to elaborate on these points later on, and of course, be careful. I'm testing some of the ideas with your ideas, so try not to listen to me in a submissive way in order to accept, but try to criticize, to find fault with the ideas presented here. We can talk about a triangle of Islamic rules of economic system. One of them is property, the second rules about economic motivation, and the third are about the rules which determine the solution of basic economic problems such as what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. We'll try to show that the prohibition of has implications for all of these solutions. For the most part, on the problem regarding how or for whom to produce. In other words, on the problem of distribution of wealth and income. And presence of Riba, on the other hand, may be characteristic of other economic systems, for example, capitalism. I think at least one basis of naming capitalism as capitalism can be derived from its relationship with interest. Now, let's start with what we by implication criticize as micro approach to the prohibition of riba. This approach is normally based on the concept of adala and zulm. And it is claimed that transactions that involve riba lead to injustice, at least to one party, and in order to prevent this injustice, riba is prohibited. This can be considered from 2 points of view. These are not things that we are trying to invent, but these are things that already assumed when analyzing the issue from a micro level. For example, this is something that applies both to Western history of economic ideas and Islamic history of economic ideas. Those who treat this issue claim that the basis of or rationale of prohibition of riba is to prohibit, to prevent injustice in the context of lending, because normally those who are rich lend money to those who are poor, and to ask for an increment in return or as a return is to make the poor poorer, and since this is a transfer of wealth from poor to wealthy, to the rich, this makes, on the other hand, rich richer. And this is obvious that is an injustice, a transaction that strengthens the maldistribution of income and wealth are not fair. And this must be rectified in the other. That's why you see the interest, or usually prohibited in almost all religions, in Judaism, in Christianity, and in Islam. And it was prohibited throughout history in most of the legal systems. And now, moving from the same basis, some enemies are trying to legitimize the presence of interest. Since the basis of prohibition of riba was injustice to one party, if you find some sort of transaction where this injustice does not apply, then this transaction must be legal, lawful, must be permissible. And they claim that the analysis we just tried to make regarding the relationship between lender and borrower used to apply to older times before the emergence of modern business life and organization. They claim that, okay, at that time, the parties to a contract of lending or credit contract was like what you mentioned. The lenders were rich, the borrowers were needy people, and it was just normal to prohibit such a transaction in order to prevent the exploitation of poor people by the rich. But in the course of time, the situation has radically changed. And now in modern practice, the normal people who lend money are not rich people, but are relatively poor, or are middle class people and those who borrow money are rich people. So if you try to evaluate the legal judgment about interest transactions, you must review your valuation about the issue. Now, in modern practice, if there is a transfer of income and wealth from one party to the other, this is in the form of a transfer of wealth and income from relatively richer sections of the society to middle class or poor people, because the modern credit system collects deposits from relatively poor people, and it allocates the funds thus gathered to rich people in order to initiate new business. So if you are going to apply the principle of justice, a transfer of income from richer sections of the society to the poorer ones is just good. So on this basis, Riba transaction based on Riba must be legitimate because they satisfy the ideal of justice. In fact, if you evaluate the situation in a different way, it may lead to injustice. It may mean a transfer of income and wealth from poorer parties to the richer parties to the contract. This is a method of approach shared by, I think, both Muslims and non-Muslims. And I'm afraid if we accept this method of approach, we will have to accept the legitimacy of the contracts of interest or contracts based on loan with interest. If your basis of evaluation is adalat and zulm, and if zulm is removed and adalat is ascertained, ensured, so why should you object to transactions that provide this result? Is it understandable, clear?
Yeah, the question also can there be or can we say precisely the zone of innocence is removed and another is restored when there is still there is still the ban, but at the same time we say another is restored or is ensured and zone is removed.
What do you think, Ruby?
It depends on the definition of zulm, because we define first zulm as taking the money from the poor to the rich.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first definition of zulm, isn't it? So if we define zulm as this, it means that you say that today people give what's banking system is actually giving the money from the poor to the rich, isn't it? from the poor to the rich.
Yeah, relatively speaking.
Yeah, not relatively poor.
Yeah, there may be some individual cases where still the previous relationship between the parties to a contract of interest may apply, but generally speaking, normally now financial funds are gathered from middle-class people and poor people, and they are allocated to richer. This is normal. Why? Not that rich people are poor, of course, but because they need utilization of these sources in the business. They use all of their assets in their enterprises, but this is not enough for them. They need the other available funds from middle classes and poor people.
Prof, do you think that it is justice? It's unjust also, isn't it? Still in the line of the previous argument, that it is injustice, isn't it?
Now, when you restrict your perspective with the transaction, I think wouldn't it be just unfair to transfer some amount of money gained by the rich people to the poorer, relatively poorer ones?
That way.
Yeah, if you restrict your perspective to the transaction only, not really consider the other consequences later on. But for the time being, we are just considering a contract between the lenders and borrowers. And the reason why poor people and middle class people are in a position only to lend money and not to utilize it themselves, because the volume of modern business is very great, very large. And so the small amounts saved by poor people, small savers and middle class savers, is not enough to initiate a new business. So middle classes and lower classes are not able to establish businesses with their funds, their money, with their savings. So these funds are gathered in banks in the form of deposits, and the amounts that were originally not enough to start a business, when come together in the deposit accounts, becomes large, huge amounts. For example, 100 ringgit alone is not important to initiate a business, but millions of 100 ringgits make an important amount.
Yes.
And these amounts are normally allocated to people who have... yes. And these are rich because when banks consider lending money to some people, they want to make sure that this money will come back to them, will be returned to them. If you allocate it to the poor people, they may not return to you. So normally banks do not lend money to poor people or relatively poor people. They prefer rich people, those who carry the guarantee of returning the money to the bank after the term of lending. Right. So that's why in practice, money is not lent to poor or middle class, lower or middle class people by the banking system or monetary system. It is normally lent to rich people. So in practice, in modern practice, the practice of lending money turns out to be lending money from middle classes, lower classes to rich classes. And the normal type of lending money is investment loan, not consumption loan. Consumption loans are becoming important only recently. They are not so important. And consumption loans are just marginal in the practice of modern banking and credit systems. So, although some examples may be cited, but the normal working of the system is based on investment loans, and investment loans are made to rich people. So if this is the case, if you prohibit riba, rich people would use this money without paying anything to lenders. So wouldn't it be fair and just to ask those rich people who utilize the funds gathered from the small savings of middle class and lower classes, wouldn't it be just and fair? It would be.
Yes.
If they wouldn't pay anything, this wouldn't be fair. But if you ask them to pay something back in return for the use of these funds, I think it would be more fair and just.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm one-sided when we confine Orman, and injustice too, when we confine them to a situation where money is, say, obtained or is given to the rich from the poor. If you confine them to this money, what would be the status of an unlawful gain made by the poor or by a poor person or party from the rich, for instance? If there's lawful gain, unlawful gain, which is made by the poor side from the rich side, can he also be considered as riba, given that this is lawful, this is an unlawful gain?
No, if you prohibit interest, the transfer of money from rich to poor will be unlawful, of course.
From rich to poor?
Yeah, but if you do not prohibit it, because I tried to explain that the base of prohibition of riba was considered to be justice, adalah, and it was explained as the basis of prohibition of interest, because it required transfer of money from poorer to the richer, and that this was not something that should be allowed. And on that basis, the riba was prohibited. It is claimed to be like that. Now I'm trying to show that this logic, this way of, this method of approach to analyzing the problem is not strong enough. Yes.
We get your point.
Because the same logic may turn against us.
Yes.
Previously, most of the loans were consumption loans. And consumption loans are normally from rich people to the poor people. And it can easily be explained as an exploitation of poor by the rich. And you can say that on this basis, interest may imply the exploitation of those who are poor by the rich people, and any legal system must not allow to such an exploitation. But this, the prevalence of consumption laws is now a historical fact, just a historical fact. It does not apply to modern times. In modern times, the usual form of loans is investment loans. And investment loans, as we try to describe, is diametrically opposite to the consumption loans. It is from poor, lower classes, middle classes to rich, upper classes. So, if the basis of your evaluation is justice and to prevent injustice, this does not apply to this new form of lending money. So, on that basis even, you must allow for a transfer of money or in the form of interest from the borrowers to the lenders, because the borrowers now are rich and the lenders are poor. If you are trying to rectify the imbalances in the distribution of income and wealth, you must allow this in order to give way, to make allowance for the improvement of distribution of wealth and income. If you do not allow this, you know what the motivation of rich people or entrepreneurs to borrow. They borrow it to allocate it in new businesses, and they gain from this. And if you do not allow a share for the lenders, in this game they will become richer, and the lower and middle classes, at least relatively, will become poor. So this means injustice. And if you are trying to rectify the situation, you must allow a transfer of value, economic value, from richer classes to the lower and middle classes, which now, in the relationship between lenders and borrowers, is exactly as what we tried to show. Lenders are poor, relatively poor, and borrowers are relatively richer.
So, in other words, we cannot base the argument of provision of riba on adalah.
Yes, in this sense, an adalah perspective, which is restricted to individual transactions. Because if you base on it, your logic may turn out against you. And on the basis which you try to explain the prohibition of riba, now you must accept the legitimization of riba in order to satisfy the ideal of justice.
Well, maybe the problem is last time, maybe this is one individual with one individual.
Yes.
One poor man,
yes,
they're asking the money from one rich one. But the modern time is thousands of poor men.
Yes.
Okay, thousands of poor men giving the money to one rich man.
Yeah.
And then this rich man give the return in terms of interest.
Yes.
So it is not one-to-one, rather than
it's a systemic phenomenon now.
Between a society to a single man.
Yes.
So this other is you don't have to you cannot base it on another in the sense of transferring money from the poor to the rich when another is in the presence.
Yes. This is distributive justice. If you are trying to realize distributive justice, your logic may be different when you consider historical types of lending money and other types of lending money. That's why I think the issue must be considered not at micro level, which is based on the concept of adala and zulm, but must be based on a wider perspective, which again, in fact, is based on adala and zulm, but in a different sense, in a wider sense, in a systemic sense. This I call macro approach to the consideration of riba and its consequences. So here we consider the prohibition of riba not just a prohibition restricted to individual transactions, but we consider the prohibition of riba as a maximum or rule of the game of Islamic economic system. It is a principle of, basic principle of an Islamic economic system. Without resorting to the prohibition of riba, we wouldn't be able to talk about an economic system which is Islamic. This is a prohibition of riba is important in this sense.
In other words, the prohibition of riba is the salient feature of Islamic economic system.
Yes, one of the salient features, because
fundamental
yes,
element of
yes.
Islamic economic system.
So once you accept the institutional interest, and here I must clarify another point. There is, in my opinion, there is no important difference between usury and interest. Again, some writers try to distinguish between usury and interest, and they claim that usury may not be allowed and must be prohibited if it is okay, but interest, which is a relatively low rate of interest for increment on loans, and is not personal according to the situation of parties to the contract. It is determined by a market which is objective, which is impersonal, and then it is something that can also satisfy the ideal of justice. As our later discussion will, I hope, clarify, this is not important in our perspective, the perspective we are trying to clarify. So, usury and interest in our evaluation are the same. There is no difference, and the difference between them is not important from our perspective. Because what is important, even could say that interest is more important from this point of view. If anything, interest must have been prohibited instead of usually, because usually is an exorbitant rate of interest, if we can say, put it like that, and it is quite clear. Its viciousness is conspicuous. You do not need to prohibit people from committing this kind of thing or entering into transactions of this kind. If people, despite everything, enter into such contracts, it means there are things compelling them to go into this kind of contracts. So prohibition will not prevent or rectify anything. You don't need to prohibit it. But if you are going to prohibit anything, this must be interest, because it is attractive. It can attract great numbers of people. It may involve all actors of an economic system. So if you are trying to make a distinction between what is Islamic or not,